chosen ones. There is a rhythm to this realm, a sacred symmetry etched into everything, from the orbit of distant planets to the pulse in your chest when you sense you're being watched. This rhythm is governed by laws older than civilization, older than language, older than time itself. Among them, the law of correspondence stands at the gate, as above, so below, as within, so without. But you didn't just walk past the gate, you shattered it. The moment you deviated from what was written, the balance shifted. Reality bent in ways unseen since the first creation. Monks in Tibet stopped chanting mid-breath. A Vatican seismograph picked up frequency patterns with no seismic cause. And in an underground room sealed since Babylon fell, a single word appeared on the dusty walls: your name. You weren't meant to follow the pattern. You were meant to reveal its flaw. Everything was built upon a correspondence matrix. Thought becomes form. Vibration becomes outcome. Intention becomes architecture. But when your intention burned brighter than the field could reflect, the feedback collapsed. In the ancient texts, this is described as the eruption of the fifth mirror, a rare phenomenon when a soul becomes more real than the world around it. Now, everything is watching. The councils that govern cause and effect, the hidden ones who encode synchronicity, even the watchers of the watchers, those who never intervene unless the outcome endangers the entire fractal blueprint. They are stirred, not out of fear, out of awe, because this wasn't predicted, not even by them. And here's the terrifying truth no one told you. The law of correspondence wasn't meant to be broken. It was meant to be obeyed, or rewritten by someone not born of this timeline. But you weren't born. You appeared, and every dimension noticed. From this point forward, you'll be tracked across planes, not to punish, but to contain. Because if you realign this law even slightly, everything above and below will echo the change. The stars above you began to shimmer differently the night your breath synced with the pulse beneath the earth. A subtle hum, once buried beneath centuries of stillness, began to rise, not in volume, but in significance. It was not sound, it was remembrance. A frequency long dormant beneath the Akashic grid itself responded to your presence, as if the memory of your soul had activated a forgotten key. Ancient watchers in spectral form turned their gaze toward a hidden locus, one buried below the thresholds of conscious perception, guarded by laws only the awakened could break. In a secluded region, no map dares name a structure that does not exist in 3 dimensions, revealed itself to you, not as a place, but as a sensation. A pull like gravity, but directed toward your essence, not your body. Your fingertips tingled when you crossed the invisible boundary. Your breath held itself. The air shifted, and you were inside a chamber that knew you before you ever knew yourself. Walls made of something older than stone, pulsed with patterns, light, moving like language not yet spoken. The glyphs illuminated not from contact, but from awareness, and they formed a mirror, not of your face, but your soul. This chamber did not open with ceremony. It opened because it had no choice. The correspondence had collapsed in its presence. Something in you refused the law that linked above and below. Your existence bent the premise that mirrored realms must always match, and the chamber had been built for this moment as a failsafe. or perhaps a beginning. Its ceiling was adorned with constellations, not of the sky, but of memory. Moments from your life that hadn't happened yet, shimmered in sequence. The deeper you stepped, the louder the stillness became. Symbols rearranged themselves as if responding to a code in your DNA. The grid recognized you as an anomaly, but also as a prophecy. Not one that was told, but one that emerged from deviation itself. You were not breaking the law, you were revealing what had been hidden beneath its surface. Something stirred in the core of the chamber, not a mechanism, not a voice, something ancient waiting for you to remember why you came. And that's when the first glyph began to burn with heat, not light, as if it were waking up from a slumber that spanned the timelines. The law had been etched into everything across realms of matter and thought. The statement was a constant, a sacred mantra whispered in sleep, by mystics, chanted by sages, encoded in the spirals of galaxies and the spirals of your own DNA. As above, so below. As within, so without. But when you stepped through that threshold, you didn't mirror, you inverted. You shifted what was supposed to be balanced, and for the first time in recorded existence, the echo came before the sound. The council of the unseen gathered not out of fear, but out of confusion. For eons they had mapped reality through correspondence, mapping soul to star, desire to outcome, action to resonance. But your existence became a paradox. The sky reflected you before you chose to move. The waters rippled before your feet touched the shore, and patterns in the sand began drawing themselves long before your hand moved toward them. It wasn't prophecy, it was inversion, and inversion had no language within the structure of correspondence. You were not a reflection. You were the source, breaking the dependency between above and below. You didn't ascend or descend. You folded the line between them. That alone rewrote the unseen codes monks had memorized. Scribes had hidden and seers had feared. Your presence wasn't foretold. It was retro-written into time itself, as if the story changed the moment you entered the narrative. In ancient scrolls hidden beneath Jerusalem, a fragment long dismissed as metaphor suddenly made sense. It read, "The one will come, who is neither shadow nor light, but the hand that separates them." And beside this line in ink faded with age, the name, Yeshua, was written not as author but as witness, for he too had once stepped beyond the mirror but chose to walk back in. You chose differently. And because of that, the celestial spheres began to spin off, axis not wildly, not with chaos, but with curiosity. Creation watched with bated breath, not sure if it was witnessing a fall or a return. You reached out in that chamber, not to touch, but to command, and the chamber obeyed, breaking its sacred link to the sky above and the earth below. For you had become both in one movement, and something beyond the law waited just beyond your reach, unseen but listening. It wasn't a word in the common tongue, and it wasn't something taught or inherited. It rose through your throat like a memory. Not yours, but older than your blood. A syllable that vibrated beyond human hearing, as if it belonged to a different physics entirely. The moment it left your lips, the air pulsed inward, like the universe inhaled, not out of shock, but out of necessity. Because the mirror realm could no longer hold its reflection intact. Every mirror across planes did not shatter. They warped like a ripple through glass, bending, not breaking, showing not your face, but versions of you scattered across timelines you hadn't lived yet. Some wept, some screamed, some stood silent with knowing eyes, but all of them reacted to that same phrase, as if they'd been waiting for you to say it, in forgotten temples built with no stone. Acolytes dropped their relics, as the sacred geometry inscribed in polished obsidian began to shift, angles, curves, spirals, all realigning. The law of correspondence, which had governed the mirror realm, relied on perfect duality. Not balance, but symmetry. Your rebellion was not destruction, it was introduction. The moment something new was spoken that had no pair, no above, no below. It cracked the entire reflective veil. The watchers who lived inside that veil, who had only ever observed you from reflection, felt fear, not because they could be harmed, but because they could no longer see. In ancient mystic texts, it said the true danger of power is not chaos, but misalignment, not evil, but originality. And when you spoke that word, you declared an origin that didn't mirror anything. Your voice became the first non-reflective sound in the mirrored continuum, and for the first time the realm failed to show you back to yourself. Somewhere across the silence, a relic began to hum, a cube of infinite folds stored within a vault of light. It began to unfold itself without command, because it had been programmed to respond to that phrase, not to the meaning, but to the frequency. A key that opened not a door but a memory across dimensions. You looked down and saw your shadow flicker, not behind you but ahead of you, and you felt something coming from the mirror, not to reflect you, but to meet you halfway through the broken veil. The collapse didn't go unnoticed beyond this dimension. There are planes so far removed from language that even thought must bow to structure. The seventh is one such place, a realm of divine order, where every motion is a consequence, not of will, but of encoded harmony. From that stillness, something moved for the first time in eons, not in haste, but in assignment, and it wore no face, only radiance shaped like an intention. The herald emerged between layers of light bending the air without touching it, a shimmer seen only by those whose frequency disobeys time itself. It did not walk. It manifested where you were, its arrival unaccompanied by sound, but followed by silence, so thick it interrupted thought. Its purpose was singular, restoration not of the law itself, but of the balance you inverted. The herald carried no weapon, because correction does not destroy it. Realigns, your presence confused it. You were not hostile, not chaotic, not wrong, and yet everything around you had moved out of sync. Harmonics collapsed in temples. Memory, streams, halted mid-flow across star-bound archives, and ancient beings stared at walls that no longer remembered who painted them. The law had not been broken through force. It had been unraveled through being, and that was something even the seventh plane did not anticipate. The herald approached you with a gesture not of attack, but recognition. For a moment it scanned your soul, not your body, and found something unexpected. A mark not made by hand, but by decision, traced into your core like a signature older than stardust. A name once spoken by only one voice, echoed quietly in the herald's awareness, and it paused, not because of you, but because of him, the one who once rewrote divine law through sacrifice alone. Yeshua's imprint lived inside the anomaly that was you, and that changed the herald's approach. Instead of reversing the imbalance, it offered you a choice. A cube of mirrored flame rose between you, each side pulsing with a different outcome. Timelines branching not in distance but in intent. The herald stepped back, not in defeat, but in obedience. Not to you, but to the one truth beyond even the seventh plane. That there are times when the law must bow to love, and you were becoming the proof of that exception, written into flesh, unknowingly rewriting what once governed all symmetry, before the world even knew balance. In the hidden halls beneath the sands, where no compass spins and no shadow falls, there exists a vault, sealed with intention, not with locks. Within it lie the tablets, not the ones spoken of in surface myths, but the untranslatable ones, encoded in a language that breathes. When light touches their surface, it does not reflect it, bends around truths too vast to be spoken, and etched on one of those surfaces is a diagram that until now no one living had matched. Your arrival into the field triggered a pulse that spread in every direction, unseen, yet undeniable. And in that moment, deep beneath the earth, the tablets responded. Light patterns realigned, and an old guardian stirred, a being neither of time nor flesh, but memory given shape. It rose not to speak, but to observe, and what it saw in your eyes was not a color or a shape, but a sequence. A series of alignments that perfectly mirrored the sacred pattern that had defied all interpretation since its discovery. The diagram was simple to the untrained eye: circles, within circles paths, crossing diagonals, intersecting a central spiral. But to the watchers of Thoth, it was a lock, a code not meant to be solved but awakened. Your eyes did not decode it, they fulfilled it, like a key carved in the forgotten language of the soul. Your gaze completed the unfinishable. The moment that happened, the vault sighed and began to open, not outward but inward, folding itself into a space that does not exist in this reality. The chamber beyond was alive, not with machinery or flame, but with resonance. Glyphs hovered in midair, unchained from stone, whispering truths in tones that bypassed ears and entered essence. You walked forward not because you knew what was ahead, but because something inside you did. A knowing deeper than memory, an instinct that didn't originate from thought, but from origin itself. And behind you, the guardian bowed, not out of reverence, but realization, for the diagram wasn't a map. It was a mirror, and it had waited longer than language for someone not to read it, but to be it. The tablet glowed brighter for a moment, then dimmed, as if its purpose had been fulfilled, and yet another chamber, deeper still, stirred awake for the first time in thousands of years, as if something even more ancient had noticed your steps and was preparing to speak. Long before your breath stirred the balance, and long before the sacred syllables escaped your lips, there was a moment sealed in silence. A moment when the wind itself stopped to listen in the desert of Judea, under a night sky that bore witness to truth and concealment alike. A rabbi sat still near the rocks, surrounded not by followers, but by watchers of a different kind. They did not carry scrolls, they did not wear robes, they hovered just beyond the veil. And he knew they were listening, not to his words, but to the frequencies between them. He whispered, not as a prophet, but as a mirror, aware that time would eventually shatter its reflection. And what he whispered was not a name, but a description. One will come who will carry the code but refuse the cage. One whose essence will contradict the symmetry, not with rebellion, but with resonance. And when they speak the word that cannot be echoed, the pattern will unravel from within, not through war, but through presence. those words were never recorded in Scripture. They were not for the ears of the age. They passed through dimensions, instead stored in frequencies guarded by the few who remember what sacred truly means. And when you stepped through the chamber, when your breath shifted the laws beneath the Akashic blueprint, that whisper began to resurface. It wasn't heard, it was recognized. The herald had paused because it remembered. The diagram had opened because it remembered. The chamber deeper still had stirred because it remembered. And you were the only one who had forgotten until now. Your walk was not random. Your actions were not mistake. You weren't breaking laws. You were responding to a whisper older than this age. A whisper that once came from a man whose blood held the contradiction of heaven and earth, whose words could bend time, not because he demanded it, but because he embodied it. You walked forward with no blueprint, and yet every glyph bent in your direction, not as a warning, but as a welcome. And somewhere beyond the veil, where even light folds into silence, he watched, not as a judge, but as a witness again. For what you were about to awaken was something he once chose not to, and now it had fallen into your hands, trembling with possibility. When the Council of Nine realized the balance had shifted, they didn't speak. They acted deep beneath the crust in sanctums, guarded by oath, not by weapon. A conclave of ancient alchemists convened not out of fear, but duty. For thousands of years, they had watched the laws not through faith, but through formula, preserving the sacred geometry that binds vibration to manifestation. Their task was not creation, it was containment. And now, the ripple you caused had begun to stretch across equations that were never meant to bend. They opened the hermetic lock, a failsafe designed in the age of Atlantis, encoded by the last being who had once glimpsed the law beyond correspondence. This lock was not a gate, but a grid, a lattice woven of elemental truths, sealed with 7 sigils and 1 silence. It was not meant to hold a person. It was meant to suppress a frequency, and that frequency was now radiating from you. They studied your movements from afar, tracking not your steps, but the wake you left behind. Trees leaned differently after you passed. Rivers flowed in inverse patterns. Compasses spun in spirals when set in your path. Something in your presence disrupted the reflective bond between above and below, as if you no longer responded to echoes, but created them. The alchemists moved quickly, their hands scribing runes mid-air, inkless yet permanent. Words shaped from breath and intent, forming the binding chant that would activate the lock. But the moment the final sigil hovered into place, the grid flickered. Your ripple had already woven into the frequencies they relied on. Their math no longer held. Their silence was no longer still. One of them stepped back, eyes wide not with confusion, but realization. You were not the anomaly. You were the missing variable. The lock wasn't failing. It was rejecting the command. The ripple pulsed outward again, softer this time, but more complete. And one by one, the sigils dimmed, not with defeat, but with deference. The grid acknowledged you not as a prisoner, but as a source, and the hermetic lock began to collapse, not from error, but from evolution. For what they had built to restrain now bowed to resonance that couldn't be predicted. And as the final rune vanished, a portal opened, not to stop you, but to lead you somewhere. They had never dared to go themselves, a place beyond the equation, beyond the law, waiting only for you. There are wheels above, the sky wheels that do not turn with time, but rotate with intent. These celestial mechanisms are not physical. They are harmonic constructs whose rotations govern the flow of prophecy, memory, and incarnation. Each spoke is a vibration, each axis a song aligned perfectly since the dawn of conscious awareness, and yet the moment your voice echoed through the unseen, something in the wheel stuttered, not stopped, just trembled enough for the entire structure to notice. It wasn't the content of your voice that caused it. It was the quality, the resonance laced with paradox, a tone that held stillness and movement, at once joy and grief, fire and breath. Something spoke through you not as a possession, but as a convergence, and when that convergence rippled into the harmonic layer, the celestial wheel could no longer maintain its rhythm. What was above no longer reflected what was below. It began to drift, not toward chaos, but toward curiosity. The keepers of the wheel, ancient intelligences, bound to the song, began to recalibrate their measures. At first, they believed a rogue anomaly had slipped through the veil, but as they analyzed the waveform, it showed a familiar imprint, one that had only been seen once in recorded celestial motion, the time when Yeshua exhaled on the hill and time split open briefly to swallow death. Your voice didn't mimic it, but it harmonized with it, and the wheel could not ignore that harmony. A spiral opened in the fabric of perception, not for sight, but for knowing, and you were pulled into a moment where motion stopped. All directions collapsed, and you stood at the edge of the wheel, not as an outsider, but as a participant. Light bent into rings, sound into threads, time into a mirror that refused to reflect. You reached out not to touch, but to remember, and the memory came not from your mind, but from the wheel itself, a memory it had never shared with any other. In that memory was an image, not of you, but of a doorway, spinning in slow revolutions, etched with symbols you hadn't yet learned to read, but somehow already understood. And behind that door, a presence waited, not as judge, not as guardian, but as composer of a melody that had waited for your voice to return and finish the part that had never been sung. Beneath the folds of visible time, there exists a singular threshold, known only in whispers and etched into no map. A gate, not of stone or metal, but of causality itself. It is called the Gate of Reversal, and it was crafted before memory, for one purpose alone, to undo what never should have occurred. It is guarded not by beings, but by intent, and sealed by a law that predates even correspondence itself. The rule was clear: only one may enter, and only in the hour of total collapse. But somehow, it opened for you long before that hour arrived. The gate recognized your frequency, not as intrusion, but as invitation. It shimmered open, not with sound, but with stillness, revealing a realm inverted yet familiar, a place where consequence precedes cause, where rivers flow backward and thoughts echo before being formed. It was not a trap. It was a mirror turned inside out, showing you the results of choices you had not yet made, and histories rewritten by your very presence. You stepped inside, guided by something older than instinct, pulled by the gravity of remembrance. The air was thick with timelines that had collapsed and reformed on themselves, entire lifetimes. You never lived dancing in the periphery like dust motes caught in spirals. Each step echoed both forward and backward, your motion dragging fragments of the future into the past and bending the past into shapes the future had forgotten to allow. The gate began to shift behind you, pulsing with uncertainty, as if unsure whether to remain open or seal itself forever. But it couldn't decide, because you weren't supposed to be here, and yet everything here already knew you. Symbols rearranged in your presence, walls rippled as if recognizing the blueprint written in your bones, and high above in the non-sky, a constellation you had never seen formed into an eye, watching not with judgment, but with awe. In the center of this space was a single pedestal. Hovering above a spiral of descending light atop it rested a sphere perfectly still, reflecting no light, yet glowing from within. You reached out, not with your hand, but with your intention. And as you did, the gate began to close, not in resistance, but in reverence. For you had already crossed the line that could never be uncrossed, and something inside that sphere began to stir, as if remembering its original owner had finally returned. Across all known systems of divine structure, the final correspondence was never meant to be accessed by a living being. It was not a destination, but a harmonic closure, a sealing of all that is with all that could be, a point where every mirror returns its last reflection and folds into silence. It was said that when this moment arrives, the pattern will lock and time itself will bow in completion. But that prophecy never accounted for you, because you were never part of the pattern to begin with. The moment you entered the chamber beneath reversal, the laws themselves began to quiet, not in fear, not in surrender, but in suspense. Every glyph that once responded to balance now pulsed in rhythm, with something far less predictable. Your presence wasn't destabilizing the final correspondence. It was completing it in a way never foreseen. The equations didn't collapse. They paused, awaiting your decision, not your obedience. Above you, the celestial wheel had slowed below you. The vault of forgotten timelines had gone still. Within the sphere you touched, light curled inward, collapsing into a singularity of memory, then expanding into a pattern, not unlike breath. The final correspondence was sealing all across the planes. Reality was beginning to settle into its next iteration, a grand exhale of cosmic design. And yet you remained outside it, not rejected, not bound, not erased, but unwritten. Your thread wasn't included in the final weave not because it was missing, but because it refused to conform. You existed just adjacent to destiny, untouched by prophecy, yet the cause of its fulfillment. You were the echo that didn't need a sound, the origin without an end. The pattern sealed, but it could not contain you, because you had become the one thing correspondence could never calculate, a living paradox of choice. As the chamber folded into its last form, the walls did not close. They opened into light, revealing paths that weren't mirrored or reversed, just new, raw, and undefined. Each one led to a reality, waiting for your signature, not your shadow. This was not exile, it was emergence. You were never meant to reflect the world. You were meant to remake it.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.